Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel L'Mias Hashem today. We will be learning Daf Kuf Yud Tes Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on Kuf Yud Tes Amid Aleph, 4 lines off the bottom. Last word on the line: Siman Shin Yud Gimel Sif Zayin. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanasuna Batzara Ubashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayom Ubein Bayabasha Hamakim Yerachem Aleihem. V'yitzieh mitzara l'rvacha me'afelu la'oro mishiba l'geula hashta bagalo v'zman kariv v'nemar amen. Our learning should be a schus refuah shalema from Moshe ben Esther Fradel, Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha, Rafael Yisrael Menachem ben Ita Gdendel Chavadasa Baserel. They should have a refuah shalema b'sar shar chayla Yisrael. Our learning should be a schus for Yonasan ben Michal and Yoel ben Michal. The Rabbi Shalom should watch over them together with all of our other brothers and sisters who find themselves in harm's way. B'chol makom shehem. So, says the Mechaber Siv Zayin, Koira shenishbara. If you have a beam of a house that broke, so imagine you have what by today's standards, I guess, would be a very primitive house, and the house, let's say, has a peaked roof, and you have joists going across the roof, big beams, and one of the beams broke, and now the beam is sagging. Now, the beam is a major support member of the house, so you want to support that beam. So what you want to do is, you want to take a bed. Now, we're going to make reference here to Aruchas Hamita. Literally, the Aruchas Hamita, I guess in English you would probably translate it as bedposts. I don't think it's incredibly specific. It means the parts of the bed. Now, I want you to imagine a bed frame. So you have a headboard and a footboard. Then you have 2 side posts. And then you have cross members going from one side to the other that's going to support the mattress. Now, you want to use this bed in order to support an upper beam that broke. I don't know if it broke cleanly in 2 or it's cracked. And now it's sagging and maybe in danger of collapse. So you want to take the bed here. Let's say this is the bed. Okay? You want to take the bed and you want to stand it up so that it could support the beam. So here's your beam. You had a bed, right? The bed is flat. It's got the mattress on top. You want to stand up the bed and you want it to support the beam. Says the Mechaber, Karish and Ishbara, you have this beam that broke. Mutter l'samcha ba'aruchais hamita. You're allowed to support the beam using the posts of the bed. Shehem keli, because the bedposts and the bed have a din of a keli. Now, we'll get to what the Mechaber means there in a moment. But first, the Mechaber gives a caveat. He says, Loi kitei sheta'ale. Now, you can't take the bed and force it up. See, the beam is sagging. You cannot take the bed and force it up under the beam so that you should push the beam up and kind of try to get it back either into place or at least closer to being into place. You can't go ahead and use the bed to elevate the beam. That you cannot do. Loi kedei shetale. You can't elevate the beam. Dem kain havale boina. Because that would be an act of boina. That would be building. Because what you're doing is you're actually taking the bed and you're constructing. You're putting the beam back into place by using the bed. That is too uncomfortably close to boina. That you can't do. Ella kidei shaloi tered yoiser. All you could do is, the beam is sagging, you could take the bed and stand it up under the beam to support the beam so that the beam cannot collapse further. Now, let me just explain to you what's at play over here. We've already mentioned several times that when you have something that's a keli, when you take a keli and you want to attach it in some way to a binyan, to a structure, since what you're attaching is in itself a self-standing keli, we don't see so much a shaila of being meisef ala binyan. So, for example, In the beginning of Shin Yud Gimel, in Sif Aleph, we spoke about the bar that goes into the side of the doorpost that's used as a primitive lock, right? You put the bar into the side, and it protrudes, and it blocks the door from opening. So one of the things that we said over there was, you have to take that bar, and you have to turn it into some kind of a keli. You have to turn it, either you have to turn it into a keli that could be used to crack nuts, or something that could be used to poke olives to see if the olives are ripe or not, but you have to turn it into a keli. Why does it help to turn it into a keli? Because once that bar is seen as a self-standing keli, it mitigates the shaila of being moisef al binyan. Nobody thinks that you're taking your olive poker and you're building it into the structure. So that mitigates the shaila of boina. We're saying the same thing over here. What we're saying over here is, you see the Mechaber said, he said, the point over here is that the bed is a self-standing keli. So when you take the bed and you turn it on its side to support the sagging beam, it doesn't look like an act of binyan. Nobody is going to say that you're taking the bed, a freestanding keli, and you're building it into the house. Now that's true, so long as all you're doing is standing it up so that it supports the sagging beam. But if you were to take it and actually force it in and use it to push the beam up, now it becomes a bigger shaila of baina, because that's an act of construction. Now you're not just supporting something that's broken. No, you're doing a repair. You're elevating it and you're pushing it back up to its place. That would be a much bigger problem. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Kat Memtes. Shem Keli, a mitigating factor over here is that the Arucha Samita, the parts of the bed and the bed frame, are considered a Keli. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, V'im Einoi Keli. Let's say you're not using the Arucha Samita. Let's say you have a stick. V'im Einoi Keli, Rak Eitz Ba'alma, Kamay Makel. Let's say you don't have Arucha Samita to use to support this beam. All you have is some kind of a stick. You have a big piece of wood that you want to use. Well, in that case, says the Mishnah Berurah, Afal Pisha Muchan Hu Letaltel. Now, a stam piece of wood is muktzah makmas gufay. But what if you have a stick that you prepared on Erev Shabbos for use as a keli? Again, let's use the example of something that's it's not muktzah because you used it as an olive poker. So it's a keli, it's a klisha malach deleter. So technically, all this is like a pole. All it is a pole, but it's not a muktzah makmas gufay pole. It's a klisha malach deleter pole because you have used it to poke olives. So it's a klisha malach deleter pole. Are you allowed to take this pole and use it, stand it up under the beam, and use it to support the beam? So says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Even though this particular pole is not Aser B'tiltel, it's not Muktzah. Why isn't it Muktzah? Because you turned it into a Klisha Malach de Laheter, and now you would extrapolate, since this pole is not Muktzah because it's a Klisha Malach de Laheter, so then in the context of this halacha, L'chayra you would say, it's also a Keli, and the same way I could use the Aruchai Samita to support the sagging beam, I should be allowed to use this pole to support the sagging beam. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Become Mokayim, also l'samchay tachas hakayra to dami l'boina. Can't cuss of the Magen Avram. The Magen Avram says no. The Magen Avram draws a line over here. He says to use the Aruchais Hamita to support the sagging beam, that the Magen Avram says, the Mechaber says that that's okay. Why? Because the Aruchais Hamita are a keli. But what does it help that it's a keli? The reason it helps that it's a keli is because now there's no appearance of binyan. Because people see that, what are you doing? You're taking a bed. Nobody thinks that you're building a bed into the structure of your house. This is just an emergency support. That's all it is. If you push the beam up, now it becomes a bigger shaila. But as long as all you're doing is supporting the sagging beam, since it's very obvious that this is a bed, it doesn't look like boina. But if you have a pole, all it is a pole, Now, technically, you have turned the pole into a kli shemalach leheter. Says the Magen Avram, that's not enough to allow that you should be allowed to take the pole and use it to support the beam. Because, yes, technically it's a kli shemalach leheter, but the onlooker doesn't know that. It's not something that's obviously a self-standing keli, and therefore this is too comfortable to enact of boina, and the Magen Avram says it would be aser. Aval El Yerabba v'Teisev Shabbos cholkin alav. However, the El Yerabba and the Teisev Shabbos disagree with this Magen Avram. Umatirim b'chol davar sheshem kli alav le'inyan tiltel, and they say, listen, if technically it's a kli shemalach leheter, then it has a din of a keli. If it has a din of a keli, then we don't see a binyan problem, because you're taking a keli and it's a self-standing keli, there's no binyan problem. You're not adding a keli onto the structure. So long as all you're doing is supporting the sagging beam and you're not pushing it back up. And he says, for further detail, Aid b'pri begadim. Okay, so far the halacha over here in Sif Zayin is, you have this beam that has cracked, it's sagging. You're allowed to use the bed frame to go support it. You can't push the beam back up, but you could use the bed frame to support it, since the bed frame is a keli, and we're not going to say that you're building a keli into the structure. We don't see a shaila of boina. Says the Mechaber Vayter, however, 2 lines off the bottom, a little into the line, v'hu sheyiyu refuyim. However, there's another caveat here, and that is that when you stand up the bed frame underneath the beam, it has to be that it's loose. It can't be that you jammed it in, and like the whole weight of the roof is resting on this bed, and now it's impossible to move the bed frame. It has to be that the bed frame is there, it's lending some support, but if you needed to pull out the bed frame, it's loose. You'd be able to pull it out. And we'll see why in the Mishnah Berurah. But the Mechaber says, it has to be that the bed frame is relatively loose in its position, so that you could pull it out if you want to. But if by jamming it in under the sagging beam, it would go in there very firmly, so now you really can't pull it out, aser, then this is aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis kat nun im mahadkam, if you jam it in very firmly, then it's aser to do this. Says the Mishnah Berurah, tam, the reason is, the mevatel kli mehechonoi. This is a problem that was spoken about before. Bittul kli mehechonoi. Remember, a bed is a keli. Therefore, it's not muktzah on Shabbos because it's muchan. Muchan is the opposite of muktzah. A bed, which is a keli, it's a kli shemalach leheter, it's muchan, it's prepared for use on Shabbos, and it's completely available. But now, if you take this bed and you stand it up under the sagging beam in such a way that it's no longer possible to move it, what you just did was you were mevatel kli mehechonoi. You took a keli, a bed, that was muchan for Shabbos use and was able to be used on Shabbos, and you fastened it into place under the sagging beam so that it could no longer be used. Bittul kli mehechanoi is aser on Shabbos. This is Rabbanon. Why is it aser? Machlokes. Some say it's aser because it's like stira. It's like you destroyed the bed. Till now you had a bed that could be used. Now you have a bed that can't be used anymore. So you destroyed the bed. Others say that this is actually a boine issue. You're building the bed into place. You're fixing something into place, and that would be a boine issue. But in any case, this is why the Mechaber says, if you put it in there in a manner in which it can't be moved, then it becomes aser, because of bittul kli mehechanoi, she'ena yakol shuv litlai misham b'Shabbos, because now you could no longer move it on Shabbos. Ve'emeinu tachu b'chayzik kol kach, shari. But if it's not jammed in so strongly, if it's put in and you can still move it, then this is mutter. Okay, bottom line, Kuf Yutes Amud Aleph, moving along to Sif Ches, says the Mechaber. This brings me back to my sleepaway camp days when I was a kid. Says the Mechaber, Saf Sol, a bench. Shenishmat Echad Meraglov, where one of the legs of the bench came out. So apparently, this was a type of bench. So you've got your board on top, the seating surface, and they had legs, one leg on each side. The legs were not screwed together or nailed together. Somehow there was a socket or something that the leg went into, and it was supposed to go in there very firmly. So this was a construct that was darkoi lihiyois muhudak. This is something where the expectation is it would be put in very strongly and very firmly. But what happened now is one of the legs came out. So safsal shenishpat echad miraglov, if you have a bench where one of the legs came out, asar lahachzira l'mekaimai, you're not allowed to put it back in. Well, this flows directly from the halacha that we learned yesterday about the mito shel prakim. Whenever you have a construct that is supposed to be, it's made out of multiple parts, and the parts are supposed to fit together firmly, then if one of the parts comes out, you're not allowed to put it back on Shabbos. Why? Gzeira shema yiska. Because we're afraid if we allow you to take that leg of the bench and put it back in, you might go ahead now and use pegs or screws or nails to really attach it firmly, shema yiska, which would be an issa daraisa. So we don't even allow you to take the leg and put it back into its slot. Because since the expectation is that this bench is supposed to be tight, the pieces are supposed to go together firmly, there's a gzeira shema yiska. There's a gzeira, you might come to use screws, nails, pegs, or what have you, and be over in issa daraisa. So that's the opening halacha of Sivches. Safsol shenishpat echad miraglov, the bench, one of the legs came out, asar lachzira l'mekaimai, you're not allowed to put it back into place. Okay, so now you've got a bench. It's got a leg on one side, but it's got nothing supporting the other side. Is there something you could do? Well, an eitzah would be, take the side of the bench that doesn't have a leg. You have another bench next to it that Baruch Hashem has both legs. So the bench next to it is no problem. Take the side of this bench that doesn't have a leg and rest it on the top of the bench next to it. So, okay, the bench might be on a little bit of a slant, but now the bench is supported by the bench next to it. Are you allowed to do that on Shabbos? Says the Mechaber, to take the side of the bench that has the broken leg and rest it on top of another bench, yesh mi shemachmir le'asar. There are those that are machmir and say you're not allowed to do this. This is brought down, if you look at the Be'er HaGoyla, this is brought down from the Trumas Hadeshen. Now, if this topic sounds familiar, it is. The Ramah says, Va'ayla el simin shinches. We actually discussed this question in Shinches Sif Tez Zayin. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah, turning back to Kufiyuv Tes Amud Aleph. Mishnah Berurah is cut Nun Aleph. Lachziroi lim kaimai. You're not allowed to put the leg back on. And says the Mishnah Berurah, this is true. Va'afilu la'asaisai rafui. Even if you say, I'll take the leg and I'll put it back in, and I'll make sure that I only put it in loosely. I'll stick it in a little bit so that it still wobbles and it's loose. No, that's still aser. Why? Because again, since this is darkoi lihiyois mehudak, since this is a keli that is meant to go together tightly and firmly, we don't let you put it back in no matter how you're going to put it in, even if you're going to put it in loosely, because the problem is gzeira derabanan shema yiska. Once you go ahead to put it in, you might come to really connect it and be over an iser da'araisa. Then the Mechaber said, to rest the broken end on another bench, he brought down the Trumas Hadeshen, that's Machmir, and says you're not allowed to do that. Why aren't you allowed to do it? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Katan on Beis, Yesh Misha Machmir. Not only that, says the Mishnah Berurah, Va'afilu betiltul asr lididu. According to this Trumas Hadeshen, this broken bench is muktzah. You're not even allowed to be metaltal this broken bench. You're not allowed to move it. And explains the Mishnah Berurah, Va'akol mitam gzeira, dilma osi lahaniach haregel b'soichai v'liskaya. This is just an extension of the same gzeira that we've been speaking of, says the Trumas Hadeshen. The Trumas Hadeshen says, look, you're not allowed to put the leg back in, gzeira shema yiska. You know what? You're also not allowed to take the broken end of the bench and rest it on top of another bench. You know why? Because once you're doing something in order to support the broken end, we're afraid you're going to go all out. Once you're doing something to support the broken end, you might say, oh, this is ridiculous. I'm supporting it on top of another bench. Let me just repair the leg. And that's going to lead you to an Isser Da'araisa. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, v'chein tzasam haramal el b'siman shin chesif tezayin b'hagag ki yesh mishamachmir. Earlier in Siman shin chesif tezayin, when we discussed this halacha, the Ramah paskin like this from a sadeshen v'ayin sham b'Mishnah Berurah bir halacha kol prati din zeh. We learned a lot of details about this halacha. One of the halachas that we learned were if you use this bench in the way it is broken, if on Erev Shabbos you take the broken end and you rest it on another bench and you sit on it that way, then you're allowed to do this on Shabbos. Why? Because you've already showed that you're willing to use it the way it is. Therefore, we're not afraid that you might come to repair it. You know what? The Mishnah Berurah speaks this out. Ois Katan Nun Gimel. Vayin le'el siman shin ches hainu desham mavur. Over there we explain dem yoshav aleh kvar kach pam achad miba'od yom. If you use the bench this way, even once on Erev Shabbos, kishahal yasamach al saf salacher, when it's being supported by an adjoining bench, mutter gam b'Shabbos l'samcha al saf salacher. Now you would be allowed to even go ahead and support the broken end on another bench on Shabbos, v'loy chayshinan shema yiska, and we're no longer going to have a concern that you might come to repair it properly. Why? Because you already showed on Erev Shabbos that you're willing to use it the way it is. In that case, we no longer have a chashash shema yiska. Moving along to Sif Tes, says the Mechaber. HaTorah eitz be'etz. If somebody takes a piece of wood and jams it in firmly into another piece of wood. So you have some kind of a construct over here, and you have a piece of wood and it has a hole. And now you have another piece of wood that is made to fit inside the hole. And this is the way you're building something. Maybe you have a broom, and the bottom piece of the broom, you have a cross beam that has the bristles underneath it, and on top of that cross beam, there's a hole. And now you have a wooden broomstick. And the wooden broomstick is meant to jam, or maybe even screw, into the hole in the top of the broom piece, in the top of the cross beam. So over here, you're not using screws, you're not using nails, you're simply taking one piece of wood and you're jamming it into a hole in another piece of wood. Says the Mechaber, HaTorah eitz be'etz. If you do this, if you jam one piece of wood into another piece of wood, bein shetaka b'masmer, whether you use a nail or a screw, or bein shetaka be'etz atzmai, or you don't use any screws. You just wedge it in very tightly. The hole is made of a size so that the other piece of wood really jams into it. Ad shenis ached, until these two parts join to become one piece. Harei zeh toledes baina. This is a told of the malach of baina. It's a daraisa. Says the Mishnah is cutting on dalit be'etz atzmai. And now the Mishnah Berurah says a fascinating thing, which over the coming days is gonna, I think we're gonna have to look into it more. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this halacha is true. Bein bebinyan, whether we're talking about a structure. So in other words, a house. Let's say you have a house, and maybe you have I'm trying to think, maybe you have a banister. You have a staircase, and you have a banister. And the way the banister attaches to the house is that the banister has pegs, and the pegs go into holes holes in the wall of the house. So you take the banister, and the way you attach the banister to the wall of the house is you push those pegs into holes in the wall of the house, and you jam it in. Now, this is a shaila of binyan on a house. This is a real structure, mechubal karka. You're talking about a house that's built into the ground. This is bona fide boina. This is real binyan 101. So says the Mishnah Berurah, this halacha that the Mechaber says that when you're Torah eitz be'etz, this is a tolada of boina, says the Mishnah Berurah that's bein bebinyan, whether you're talking about attaching something to a house, a real structure, ubein bekeli, or you're talking about kalim, like the case I gave you of the broom. That's a keli. A broom is a keli. So over there, you're jamming the handle into the broom piece down by the floor. That's a keli. That's not a structure. Now, we pause over here for a second. What the Mishnah Berurah seems to be saying very clearly is that even though we said on a high level there's a rule, ein binyan bekalim, that there's no shaila of boina on utensils, hold your horses, because we see over here from this Mishnah Berurah that there definitely is binyan bekalim on some level, because, right, the Mishnah Berurah says very clearly, this halacha applies bein bebinyan, bein bekeli. Okay, we're talking about baina. So there is some malacha of baina that does apply to kalim. We're going to have to refine that, and we're going to have to figure out, when do we say ein binyan bekalim? When do we say yesh binyan bekalim? We're going to touch upon that question very shortly in the very beginning of Siman Shin Yod Dalet. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'chein, similarly, HaTorah ha'etz b'soich ha'kardoim. When somebody takes a wooden handle and pushes it into the head of an axe. So you have a steel axe head, it has a hole, and you take a wooden handle and you jam it in. That's baina. Or maybe what you do is, you put the handle into the axe head, and then you force in some kind of a peg or something to make it tight. That's also binyan. V'chein ha'mefarek eitz takua. Also, if you have such a construct where you have two pieces of wood jammed together and you break them apart, chayiv mishum seiser. That would be the malach of demolishing, of stira. V'hu sheyiskavin l'sakein. However, in order for it to be an issa daraisa, it can't be makalkal. It can't be that you're just breaking something. You have to be taking it apart for a constructive purpose. Malacha on Shabbos can only be an issa daraisa if it's being done for a constructive purpose. So, for example, the malacha daraisa of stira, of demolishing, how's demolishing constructive? Well, demolishing very often is constructive. Sometimes you have to demolish something in order to rebuild. That demolishing, that's soiser al menas livnois. That's demolishing in order to build. That's considered constructive. But just to smash something and break something, that's not considered constructive. So that can't be an issa daraisa. Says the Mechaber Vayter Sif Yud, the final sif in this siman. Chotzer sheniskalkala bimeme geshamim. If you have an earthen yard, so you have a chotzer, you have a courtyard, it's an earthen surface, there was a heavy rain, and now it's all muddy, and you can't walk over there without sinking into the mud, without getting your clothing dirty. So the chotzer sheniskalkala bimeme geshamim. The chotzer is a mess because of the rain. Says the Mechaber, Yacha lizrois by teven. You could take straw and you could spread out straw on the ground, right? Sometimes you need a surface to walk on. It's all muddy. You take straw. You throw out a nice layer of straw on top of the mud. V'loi chashiv k'moisif ala binyan. And this is not considered a shiloh of baina. Why would it be a shiloh of baina? Well, we've discussed already several times the problem of ashvuye gumais. When you have, indentations and holes and little grooves in the dirt, and you level everything out, that's a problem of baina. So over here, certainly you're improving the karka. Improving the earth is a shiloh of baina. And it seems that that's what you're doing. Right now, the earthen surface of the chotzer is not really usable. It's all muddy and yucky. But by spreading out a nice layer of teven, it becomes nice and usable. Now, if we would look at this as you are resurfacing the chotzer, then this would be a problem. But we say over here that, in the words of the Mechaber, v'loi chashiv k'moisef ala binyan. We don't look at this as being a shiloh that you're resurfacing the chotzer, that you're adding a layer of teven on top of the surface of the chotzer. Why not? Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, and hey, we don't look at this that you're putting a new surface, a new layer on top of the chotzer, so that you're improving the ground and being over on baina. Mishum d'loi mevatalei hasam. The reason is because when you spread out that straw on top of the surface of the chotzer, you don't intend on leaving it there. You're not being mevatalit. If you were being mevatalit, so let's say it wasn't straw. Let's say it was dirt, another layer of dirt. Or let's say it was fine gravel that you don't intend on using for anything else. So you intend on spreading it out and leaving it there. In that case, you resurfaced the chotzer. You were mevatalit. You intend on leaving it as a surface on the chotzer. that would be Moisef Alabinian, that would be a Baina Shaila. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, by the straw, you don't do that. Why? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, the Chazi Lamichael Behema Oiletit. Straw was valuable. The straw is animal fodder. Right now, you're spreading out some straw because you need to be able to walk without getting filthy. But when everything dries up, you're going to let your animals eat this straw. You might even rake it up and collect it and give it as animal feed. Or you might use it to mix it in to create mortar. That's what it means, letit. Remember, in Mitzrayim, they had to go collect straw, right, to make bricks. So this straw is a valuable commodity. You're not just being mavatal it to the ground, therefore it's not considered Moisef Alabinian. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, but if it would be a material that you would be willing to be mevatel and leave as a new surface on the ground, kemoi tit, like mud, the chayil or sand, or tzroiros or gravel, aser, that would be aser. Because this would be the problem of leveling and improving the surface of the ground, which could be baina. Now this could only be a problem if the kavana, you see in this case, the kavana is to improve the surface of the chotzer, the daimel binyan. Therefore it's similar to baina. But how about, we've spoken many times, how back in the day, they had earthen floors. How did you freshen up the floor in the morning? You took some fine sand, and you sprinkled some fine sand over onto the earthen floor of the house. That was the way you freshened up the floor. You covered up any spittle or any other kind of dirt that was a mess that was on the floor. The floor is dirt. But any mess that was on the floor, you sprinkled sand over it to cover everything up and give it a nice clean surface. He says, that's shari, that's mutter. The hashari lechasis haroik be'efer k'mashakasav saif simin shin yud kevin she'ed mechavan lebinyan. We've said many times that on Shabbos, when you have a mess on the floor, if you are mechin efer, if you had efer muchan, ash that was prepared from before Shabbos for this purpose, you're allowed to sprinkle it on the ground in order to cover up a mess. Why? Because your kavana is not to improve the earthen floor. Your kavana is not to make it nice and level or anything. That's not your kavana. Your kavana is to clean up a mess. And therefore it's a davar she'ein miskaven, and I guess it's not considered a psik reisha, and therefore this would be mutter. We didn't finish the mechaber. Says the mechaber. So again, just reading from the beginning of Sif Yud. Chatzar sheniskalkala b'meimik shamim. The surface of the chatzar got messed up from the rain. Yachal lizreis pateven. You're allowed to spread out straw. V'lo chashiv k'maisef alabinyan. It's not considered that you're doing baina and you're adding a new surface to the chatzar. Why? The Mishnah Berurah explained, because you're not mavatal the teven to the chatzar. Ubelvad sheyishane. However, when you do this, you have to do it with a shinui. What kind of shinui? Explains the Mishnah Mechaber. Shelo yizra loy b'sal v'loy b'kupa. You can't walk around with a basket of teven and sprinkle out the teven, or with a box of teven and sprinkle out the teven. Elo b'shulei hakupa. What you have to do is you have chena. You have to turn the box upside down. The yavi teven al shuleha. Pile up a pile of straw on the bottom of the box. Invert the box. Put a pile of straw on top. And do it that way. But to do it straight with your hand, that you cannot do. You have to do this with a shinoi. So apparently this means that the shinoi is not only that you're turning the box upside down. It sounds like it also means that you don't take your hand and throw out the teven. You put it on the box, on the underside of the box, and I guess you shake it out, because you're not allowed to do it biyad. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Oiskat nun vav, ava biyad aser. What's the isser over here? Why do you need a shinui? We said that this is not considered baina. So why do you need a shinui? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, mishum dehu uvda dechayil. Because to go spread out the teven in the normal fashion would be considered uvda dechayil. According to the Rambam, what this means is it's an uvda dechayil. If you do it in a normal way, it's a weekday activity that might bring you to do something that's osir on Shabbos. There's different types of uvda dechayil. The way the Rambam understands this uvda dechayil is not just that it's something that's not Shabbostic. There are certain things that are also because of Uvda D'Chayil, because they're not Shabbostic. That's not a Shabbos type activity. It's not appropriate for Shabbos. Then there's another type of Uvda D'Chayil, which is, since it's a weekday activity, it might bring you to do something that you would normally do during the week, which is also on Shabbos. That's how the Rambam learns this halacha. The Rambam says we're not going to allow you to spread out the teven, to spread out the straw with your hand. Because once we allow you to do it in the normal way, you might go full hog, and you might actually go ahead and start being mashve gumos. Once you're spreading things down on the ground, you might see holes, and you might start filling them in, which could be an Isser Daraisa. To do this through the agency of an Eina Yehudi would be mutter if there's a significant need to do it. Because again, this is an Issa D'Rabbanan. Amir La'aka makes it a double D'Rabbanan. B'makom mitzvah or b'makom tzarech harbe, we paskin that it is mutter. Moving along to Siman Shin Yodalid, which is going to be somewhat of a complex Siman. We're going to get a little taste of it today. Let's begin Siman Shin Yodalid Sef Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Ein binyan ustira b'kelim. High level, ain't stira binyan b'kelim. The malach of baineh, of building, applies to a binyan, to a structure, to a house. Stira, demolishing, refers to demolishing something mechubar l'karka. It means demolishing a house. We don't have binyan and stira in small kelim. That's high level. High level ain't binyan ustira b'kelim. Having said that, says the Mechaber, the Hani Mili, when is this true? She'enoi binyan mamish. When we're talking about something that is not a really solid binyan. When do we say ein binyan ustira b'kelim? When the keli that you're talking about is shvach. It's weak. It's not a binyan gomor. What does this mean? We're going to have to flesh it out. We're going to begin to flesh it out right now. Says the Mechaber, going for example, chavis, a barrel. Now the first thing right away, the Ramah jumps in and interjects. Barrel? Barrels come in many different sizes. What kind of barrel are we talking about? Says the Ramah, it has to be a relatively small, or at least not an overly large barrel. If it would be a barrel that holds arboim sa, 40 sa, how much is 40 sa? Machlokes haposkim, I think according to the Chazon Ish, arboim sa is approximately 150 gallons. 150 gallons is a sizable barrel. But says the Ramah, it has to be that the barrel that we're talking about here, again, the Mechaber says, ein binyan ustira b'kelim. When we're talking about kelim, movable utensils, ein binyan ustira b'kelim. And now the Mechaber jumped up to give us an example. And the example he's going to give us is going to be about a barrel. Says the Ramah right away, hold it. Kigon chavis, you're talking about a barrel? Says the Ramah, she'ena machzekes arba'im sa. It has to be a barrel that doesn't hold 40 sa. Why? Because if it's a very large barrel, if it's a barrel that can hold arba'im sa, that's not considered a keli. A barrel that can hold arba'im sa is considered a binyan. It's considered a structure. So the rule of ein binyan ustira b'kelim would not apply to such a large barrel. That's not a keli anymore. That's already considered a structure. That's already considered a binyan. Now let's go back to the Mechaber. So the Mechaber says, you don't have binyan and stira b'kelim. And the Mechaber said, but that's only when you're talking about a keli that's not a binyan mamish. Kigon chavis, shenishbara v'dibek shvarea bezefes. Let's say you had a barrel, and the barrel busted. So you had a broken barrel. And now you did a primitive, flimsy repair on the barrel. What did you do? You glued it back together again using zephes. Zephes is sticky pitch or tar. So, broken barrel, you did a flimsy repair. You stuck it back together again using zephes. Okay. Yachol l'shavra, you're allowed to bust open this barrel, likach masha b'soicha, in order to get access to what's inside it on Shabbos. So what are we saying here? So the Mechaber's opening thing was, ein binyan ustira b'kelim. Now, if we would just stop there, ein binyan ustira b'kelim, it sounds like you have a brand new barrel, a beautiful, intact, brand new barrel. You're allowed to smash it open. Because what do you mean? Ain't stira b'kelim. A barrel is a keli, as long as it's not our b'amasa. And we said ain't stira b'kelim. There's no isser of stira. There's no isser of demolishing on a keli. So I should be able to take this keli, bust it open on Shabbos to get access to whatever's inside it. Says the Mechaber, no, that's not true. The rule that ain't binyan is stira b'kelim is only if the keli that we're talking about is not a binyan mamish. It's not a solid, intact binyan. For example, if you had a barrel that was broken and you glued it back together with zefes, then on Shabbos you're allowed to bust it open to get to what's inside it. Why? Because it ain't stira b'kelim. Because since it's a shvacha keli, since it's a weak keli that's not really firmly put together, it's a repaired, broken keli, over there we say ain't stira b'kelim. So that's like a limitation right away on this rule of ein binyan stira b'kelim. Really? Not so fast. If it's a perfect, intact keli, then there is stira b'kelim. You're not allowed to break it open. Ain't stira b'kelim if it's a broken, repaired keli. Then ain't stira b'kelim. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kan Aleph, when is this true? She'ena binyan mamish. What does that mean? Says the Mishnah Berurah, av a binyan gomor, but to really build a solid, intact keli, ustira gemura, or to do a real demolishing. What does that mean, a real demolishing? It means you had a really intact keli, and you broke it, shaykh kam b'kelim. So real binyan and real stira does apply by kelim. You build a good, solid, proper keli, that's binyan. Yesh binyan b'kelim. You take a good, solid, proper keli and you bust it open, that's stira. V'lachein, and therefore comes the next thing that the Mechaber said. V'lachein dafka b'dibek shvareh b'zefes yachol l'shavra. That's why the Mechaber says, when could you bust open a keli? If it was a broken keli where you took the pieces and you glued it together with zefes. Dain zeh stira gemura. Because that's not real stira. It was already a broken keli before you smashed it. So that's not stira gemura. Avalim hoisa shlema, but if it was a completely intact barrel, have a stira gemura. Then to bust it open would be bona fide stira, va'aser afilu b'kli cotton. And that would be aser even by a relatively small keli. The Kasra Achrayim will come on with Siftes. The Achrayim write later on in Siftes, Tahani chaviois ketanois shal merkachas. Small barrels that were made to hold preserves. Merkachas are preserves. Date preserves, strawberry preserves. So you have a small keli, a small barrel, but it's a barrel. It's built the way a barrel is built. How is a barrel built? Strips of wood put around, and then there's metal hoops, that hoop the barrel together on top and on bottom. So you have these small little barrels, shal merkachas. Aser lahasir hachishukim shekairin reifin. You're not allowed to take the metal bands that are called hoops or reifin. You're not allowed to take those hoops off in order to open up the barrel to get to the preserves. Why? Tell you why. Because that's stira b'kelim. You have a perfectly good barrel that's made to hold jam. You're taking the barrel apart. You're taking the hoops off so that it allows the pieces that make up the walls of the barrel to come apart so you can get to what's inside the barrel. That's bona fide stira of a perfectly intact barrel. And the Mishnah Berurah explains, you might argue, wait a second, maybe this is not called stira gemura. We say, Mechaber just said, if you had a broken barrel that was put back together again with zefes, you are allowed to smash it open to get at what's inside, and that's not, over there, ain't stira b'kelim. Well, how about over here? This barrel that holds the preserves is also made of separate pieces that are being held together with metal hoops. So if you're telling me that if I have a repaired barrel that's held together with zefes, I'm allowed to smash it open because it ain't stira b'kelim. So over here I have a barrel that's made out of separate pieces of wood that are held together with metal hoops. Why can't I take off the hoops and take the barrel apart to get at what's inside? I should say ain't stira b'kelim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's not a valid comparison. Why? Very simple. This little barrel can't be compared to a broken barrel that was glued back together again. The little barrel that holds the markachas, that's made out of separate pieces of wood held together with hoops, that's the way you build a barrel. That's called a perfectly intact, proper barrel. When you take the hoops off, you're doing stira. The smashed barrel is a smashed barrel that's been repaired. However, to ask Yidei Yehudi to take off the hoops, to open up the barrel, that would be okay. We'll see that later in Siv Zayin. And the reason is because there is a shita that holds ein stira bekalim, even by a perfectly intact keli. So we're willing to be mekel al yidei ein Yehudi. Or bekasher al yidei chavalim, if the barrel is held together not with metal hoops, but it's tied together with ropes, afilu al yidei Yisrael yesh lahatir, that would be mutter even for a yid to ask a yid to do it. Ice cut and base. The Ramah said, if the Mechaber is going to give us a case of ein stira bekalim, and he's going to talk about a barrel, it has to be a barrel she'ena machazekes, that doesn't hold arba msa. The ilu hi machazekes arba msa, because if it's an overly large barrel that could hold 40 sa, heavily ka'oil, that becomes a binyan. That becomes like a tent, like a house. That's considered a structure, not a keli. This baby shum binyan estira, and then it obviously would have a din of binyan estira. I feel in binyan estira koldu, even a slight act of binyan estira would be binyan estira. It's got gimel arba msa. The Mishnah Berurah gives us a way to measure arba msa. Hainu amma al amma. This is a square amma, barum shalosh amas, 3 amas tall. Im avi hadafanois, including the thickness of the walls of the barrel. So that means that when we say a barrel that holds our bamsa, it doesn't really have to hold our bamsa, because the thickness of the walls is included in the measurement of our bamsa. But that's without the ornamental frames. This is a fancy rim on top of the barrel. Vaharaglayim, or if it has legs, those don't count in the arba'im sa. He brings us down from the Magen Avram. This barrel that was broken and was repaired and glued together with Zephes, you're allowed to break it open. You might have thought that when the Mechaber says that the repaired barrel you're allowed to bust open, maybe that means that you're only allowed to break it apart by the seams that were glued together. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Since this is a repaired broken barrel, you can smash it open wherever and however you want. We're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu should send Yeshua's for us, Parnas and Sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the B'yes Kol Tzedek. V'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.